There's a lot of excitement and new information coming out about how nature heals. People have gone to wilderness for answers, for solace. Since humanity existed on Earth, we are nature. We're recognizing that more and more that return to connection with nature that we are all from can be incredibly supportive and healing in so many ways.
This episode is sponsored by TherapyNotes, therapynotes.com. Be sure and check them out, and be sure and use the promo code Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. Over 15 years ago, when I started my private practice, I had to learn a lot, and most of it the hard way, and I don't think you need to do the same. Hi, I'm Gordon Brewer, a licensed psychotherapist, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. Join me in this journey of discovery as we have conversations with other leaders and professionals in both the mental and allied health fields. Join us as we explore both the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Gordon Brewer, and this is episode number 343 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. So glad you've joined us. And if this is your first time listening in, glad you're here. And if you are coming back for more, glad you're back, and hope you've taken time to follow us or subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. So I'm looking forward to you hearing from my guest on this particular episode, Heather Hendrie. And Heather is a therapist located in Canada. And really one of the things that we talk about, or several things that we talk about, is her use of nature-based therapy. And I think most of us know the benefits of being outside and being in nature and how that can affect just our whole psyche. But Heather and I kind of dive deep into that, and also talk about some other issues, in particular people, as she puts it, people that are menstruating and some of the extreme hormonal changes that some people endure, and talk about how that affects them, and the book that she wrote around that particular topic called Awfully Hilarious. So looking forward to you hearing from Heather. It was a great conversation, and she was a lot of fun to be with on the interview. And also, before we get to my conversation with Heather, one of the things I'd like you to be aware of is that, and if you're on my email list, and if you're not on my email list, you can do that by going to practiceoftherapy.com, and you'll see ways to sign up. But one of the things I sent out this week is making people aware that my friend Ashley, who has started the Mental Health Wear TN store, online store that sells apparel and different swag items, particularly for the mental health field, she is having a back to school sale right now. So depending on when you're listening to this, the school sale lasts until August 17th. But if you'll go over to Mental Health Wear TN.com. And if you will use the promo code BACKTS24, you can get 25% off your first order. And she's already starting to put out some things for Halloween and for the fall. So be sure and check it out. mentalhealthweartn.com. And also, before we get to my conversation with Heather, I'd love you to hear from one of the members of the Psychcraft network, along with some information about Gusto and also TherapyNotes, who is a sponsor of this podcast. You know, as you grow your practice, one of the things that comes up is, how do you pay your people? You know, when I started my group practice, one of the things I had to figure out was how to do payroll. You've got not only how to pay the people, write their checks for them, but also if they are employees, how are you going to withhold FICA and Social Security and all those things? Plus, if you want to provide benefits, such as health insurance or a 401k or any of those kinds of things, it's really pretty complicated. But I found a solution, and that solution is Gusto, and it's what I use in my practice now. It is an all-in-one system that handles your payroll, helps you provide benefits, it pays your taxes for you, all in one place. And doing payroll is never simpler than with Gusto. It only takes me about 10 to 15 minutes to do my payroll every time I do it. So I'd love for you to go check it out. You can go to practiceoftherapy.com/gusto to find out more about that particular platform. I'm always recommending it to the people that I consult with, and I think you would like it as well. Also, if you are just paying contractors, they do that as well. They will also send out your 1099s for you. So be sure and check it out. practiceoftherapy.com/gusto.
Hey there, I'm Aaron Potratz.
And I'm Nathan Hawkins. If you don't know us yet, we're the hosts of the Shrink Think podcast, which bridges the gap between therapist and clients.
The Shrink Think podcast is proudly part of the Psychcraft Podcast Network, focused on helping people live more meaningful and productive lives.
Join us every Wednesday in our engaging, informative conversations and lighthearted humor to help you normalize and demystify therapy for those beginning or continuing their mental health journey.
We discuss everything from understanding styles of therapy to addressing conflict with your counselor, learning about attachment styles, and the fear triangle. We seek to run the gamut of topics to pull back the curtain and empower effective therapy.
If you haven't listened yet, you can find us at shrinkthink.com/podcast and discover other resources, including educational videos and fun swag at our swag shop.
Ready to upgrade your practice from a rusty bicycle to a shiny new sports car? Buckle up, because TherapyNotes is here to turbocharge your journey. It's the comprehensive practice management system you've been craving, equipped with everything you need to navigate patient records, schedule seamlessly, host remote sessions, craft detailed notes, and tackle insurance billing with ease. And guess what? It's your trusty sidekick, available whenever and wherever duty calls. Picture having more quality time with your clients, all thanks to this digital assistant that never clocks out. Here's the kicker. It's Gordon approved, so you can trust it's the real deal. Bid farewell to paperwork headaches and embrace a new era of efficiency and top-tier care. Ready to level up your private practice game? Swing by practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes and punch in promo code GORDON for 2 months on the house. Enjoy the show.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And you're in for a treat. I've just, in the few minutes I've gotten to talk with Heather Hendrie. She is going to be a lot of fun to have a conversation with. But welcome, Heather. Glad you're here.
Thanks. Delighted to be here.
Yes. So as I start with everyone, why don't you tell folks a little more about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed?
Absolutely. I have a private practice, nature-based, in Whistler, British Columbia, on the west coast of Canada. But like many of us, I came to counseling and the therapeutic practice sort of later in life. I worked for a long time doing environmental behavior change work in municipal government and international tour guiding for years through different parts of the world. And then through a process and a journey of my own, came to a place where I really wanted to support and help other people through nature-based approaches to therapy.
Awesome. And, I think a lot of folks are probably not as familiar with nature-based therapy, although it sounds really appealing to me, especially where I live here in kind of the Appalachian Mountains, and a lot of hiking trails and just a lot of great kind of nature things. Say more about what that is and what got you into it and your passion around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of excitement and new information coming out about how nature heals. And we, of course, all know about this because we are part of nature, and nature-based therapeutic work has been happening for eons under different names. Of course, people have gone to wilderness for answers, for solace, for millions, well, since humanity existed on Earth. We are nature. And yet in more recent years, there's been a recognition that the systems under which we're living create a habitat that's often causing a lot of problems for us. Sometimes these get pathologized, but we're recognizing that more and more that return to connection with nature that we are all from can be incredibly supportive and healing in so many ways. So I would say there was a return to the idea of wilderness therapy when many folks were sick in the early 1900s with tuberculosis in Manhattan hospitals, where they were overflowing, and they found out that the folks who were placed in Central Park in tents, interestingly, seemed to heal faster. And so there was this reminder and a resurgence of the potential power of nature to help and to heal. And that spurred a lot of different things. One thing that came out of that later on was the outward bound approach to nature-based growth, leadership, resilience building. And in more recent years, more and more therapists, or I'd like to say taking to the trails, especially since COVID, and offering various new approaches. I'm going to say new in quotation marks, but different approaches to therapeutic work that take it out of the office and back into the community in various ways.
Right, right. And I know even in my own practice, I know I've had several clients where we've just where where my office is located, we've got a great area to walk in. And so we'll just get out and walk and do therapy, just walk and talk. And I think to me, that is probably does as much to help people's moods as anything I know of.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. I didn't know that you did that. And one thing I
Yeah.
imagine you notice, Gordon, is for some people, moving is a lot more comfortable. It's easier to share some of these deeper intimacies or vulnerable moments when we're moving. The other thing that happens there, generally automatically, is we're side by side as opposed to facing one another. And historically, as a predator species with eyes on the front of our faces, for many people, looking face to face can feel quite threatening. So there
Hmm.
are a lot of reasons that being outdoors or being side by side can be so helpful in the therapeutic process. It's very
Yes.
exciting. That's something that you've
Yeah.
just come to. And I'm curious how
Yeah.
you know kind of when and who to do that with.
Yeah, it's part of it is I think for the most part it's always been long-term clients. And so it's, people that are really comfortable with me and know kind of a little my story and know that I like to be outdoors and, active and that kind of thing. And so they'll just say, "Hey, can we walk today instead of sitting in here?" And I'll say, "Absolutely." But usually it's on a day when the weather is just really great and we're all itching to get outside anyway. So, but yeah. But yeah, something kind of a little side note, not to go too far down on a tangent, but you might find this interesting, Heather, and I know maybe some of the listeners, but my daughter, she's a kindergarten teacher, but she teaches at what is called the Wahatchee Forest School. And so she's outdoors with those kids, year rain or shine. And so
Yeah.
all of her teaching is in a lot of environmental stuff, but it's, just the benefit of those kids being outside and being in nature and playing in the creeks and the mud puddles and all the stuff. And so she absolutely loves it. And it just reminded me of that and just the benefit of not only therapy in that way, but learning in that way.
That's so lovely. And how I would have loved to be a kindergartner in her class, outdoors splashing in the mud puddle. Nature's always been such an incredible space for me to connect and simply feel like myself and feel well. And I think that's really what's inspired me to bring this work forward to others and to
Mm.
mentor new clinicians in that space. And I really found myself needing to go to nature in that I, for 30 years, went with an undiagnosed mental health condition. Well, menstrual health condition, I will say. It's called premenstrual
Okay.
dysphoric disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Many of us will see it in practice, but not necessarily recognize it. It's often misdiagnosed as bipolar disorder or other sorts of cyclical mood disorders like cyclothymia. So for me, I didn't know what was going on. I knew something was wrong, and I just knew that I always felt better in nature. So for years, I remember thinking, oh, I just want to walk with people in the woods. And then I
Hmm.
remember thinking a couple of years ago, oh wow, this is now what I'm doing. I'm out here walking in the woods, supporting folks in coming back into connection with who they are at the core. And I couldn't feel more honored to get to do this.
Yeah, yeah. You want to say more about the kind of for people that might not be as familiar with premenstrual dysphoric disorder, and I'm sure there's probably an acronym for it, but
You got it.
uh,
The PMDD. And
Yeah.
the reason I bring in my story and want to share that with our listeners, largely other clinicians, of course, is because it's gone unrecognized for a very long time. But 1 in 20 menstruating folks will have a condition, an atypical response to the change in hormones. Generally, their hormone levels are normal, but there's a sensitivity to when that changes in the luteal phase, generally after ovulation, before menstruation. And it presents with a lot of psychological symptoms, but it's physiological in nature. And that's why I'm very passionate about sharing it here, because it can be very dangerous. And I will warn folks listening, it can have suicidal ideation in at least, well, they're thinking now more than 30% of the folks that have this condition. And for most of the folks that do have it, because we haven't talked openly about stigmatized subjects in our society, such as menstruation, it goes unnoticed for a long time for most folks. In my case, the diagnostic process, despite having a doctor as a father, becoming a clinician myself, was a 30-year journey. On average, I think they're saying these days it's taking up to around 10 years for folks, which
Wow.
is really too long. And that's why I always want to make sure I mention it anytime I speak. Yeah, and just so that we can be on the alert. And for example, one thing that I watch for a lot with my clients is I meet with my clients on a very regular basis, generally every couple of weeks. And because of that, I can see real ups and downs. And so that's something that I'm always paying attention to. And if we come back to nature-based work, the the menstruating body in particular is a cycling body.
Hmm.
Originally, of course, cycling with the moon. And so paying attention to the cycles and the seasonalities in the world around us and within our clients, but getting to notice patterns, we're in a really unique, privileged position to help draw some attention to something that may have been otherwise missed.
Right, right. Yeah, so what are maybe some questions that clinicians can maybe be asking to kind of maybe rule out or figure out, is this something that maybe we need to look more in more depth? Yeah.
Yeah, great question. And I mean, when I began as a clinician, my intake process and questions have changed a lot. They've really expanded. So now something I make sure to include in my intake process are all the stigmatized questions. I'll ask people about their relationship to sex, sexuality, and gender. I'll ask about their relationship to their menstrual cycle if they live in a menstruating body. I'll ask about the things right away. I'll ask about finances. I'll ask about the things quite early on where there might be some discomfort or sensitivity or taboo feeling, such that I might pick up something right away or later down the road. It creates an opening where we can have these conversations.
Right, right. Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think probably as a result of that, it helps establish some pretty good rapport with people pretty quickly.
And it's really interesting, depending on the client, of course. Some people will open up right away about various things going on, others not at all. But I've really noticed in screening in this way in the intake, I'll often get a really good idea right away and start to pick up various things and know what to watch for, as well as, like you say, create that rapport to open the conversation.
Right, right. Yeah, and so with your work, one of the things I know we were chatting about before we started recording is this very niche specific work
Mhm.
has just caused your practice to explode, but also taking you in some other places and writing a book and that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
tell that story and just how
Yeah.
all of that came together.
Yeah, thanks. I've got a big smile on my face. I've actually got the books here right now.
Uh-huh.
It's an anthology series called Awfully Hilarious. It began with this one, Awfully Hilarious Stories We Never Tell. And this little award, it won the Canadian Book Club Award last year for Best
Wow.
Anthology. Which delighted me no end because this happened by accident. What happened, Gordon? I'll
Uh-huh.
just share with all of us here. A few years ago, I went on a terrible date. And it was just sort of shocking what happened on this online date. It was during the early COVID times, and I called up a dear friend of mine in tears, and she was crying too and said, "You would not believe the date I just got home from. We could write a book." And fast forward, we did. And the intent was to let other folks out there know, if they were online dating, that they're not alone in these challenging, vulnerable experiences. But what was interesting is we put out a call to our friends for online date stories. We also, though, got some really interesting stories about menstruation, bodily functions, taboo moments, embarrassing things where they hadn't previously necessarily shared these things. And what everyone said who shared on these pages were, it was embarrassing or potentially hard for them to write, but also healing for them to write. And their hope was that it would help somebody else. And so the title being awfully hilarious, they're funny in general. A lot of them are quite, but with some humor in there to help ease some of the pain. And the awfully hilarious title is that most of these moments were quite awful when they happened. And then with time and friendship and community and that validating support of others, become sometimes quite funny or helpful to others. And the reason we had just planned to staple these pages together and place them in little free libraries. But another friend had recently self-published a book, and I asked him to help me. How would you do that? Because I became aware that these stories that we generally share only in the therapeutic container, if they were more accessible to more people, might be really supportive, and might be really supportive to those folks who either can't access therapy or don't have an existing rapport with a therapist. So they're not stories from clients, of course. These we put out a call to writers who wanted to share their stories. But the idea being, as an advocacy arm of our work, if we were to talk more openly about some of those stigmatized subjects, there'd be a lot of support on those pages.
Right, right. Well, I'm looking forward to reading it now, because even though I'm definitely not a menstruating person,
But here's to putting the men into menstruation, Gordon.
yes,
You're here.
that's right. There we go. But also, just on a personal note, I think most people that have been listening to the podcast know that I'm widowed, and I'm starting to enter back into the dating world. And so I'm sure some of these stories can be helpful, not only for me in the clinical sense and working with couples and that sort of thing, but also, personally and all of that sort of thing. So I'm excited about that.
Thanks so much. And thanks for sharing that. And like you're saying, it can be very vulnerable to re-enter this space of exposing parts of yourself in various ways to new people. And it really, again, that is what inspired this, is we realized we were laughing, but saying dating is not something we should be doing unaccompanied. We don't want to go back to Victorian era with chaperones, but how different it is to return to a community of friends, to be able to debrief and be held by people who really know and love us when we're experiencing something new.
You're right. It's absolutely, and I would say, not to get too far off on a tangent, but just, I think going through anything difficult in life or challenging in life, the one thing that I think everybody needs to have is community, or just having either, even if it's just one other person that they can share their internal world in a way where they know that it's going to be safe to share, and it's not going to create a lot of havoc or drama or that sort of thing, is just so important.
Oh, I'm with you. That's exactly it. And if we were to come back to nature-based therapeutic work, something that I really love and want to bring in there is that for many folks, community with other humans, attachment with other humans has been really difficult for various reasons, or inaccessible for various reasons. And yet in nature, a place we inherently all belong and are part of, the idea that we can find community and connection and attachment there as well. Perhaps it's sitting by a favorite tree that we return to day after day after day. And that we remember that the non-human, the more than human world is also a part of our community.
Yeah. It's just, I relate to that so much, just because part of my morning ritual or routine is that I'm fortunate to have a green belt close to my house. And so every morning I'm out on the green belt walking a few miles every day. And it's such a beautiful setting, and I always run into a lot of deer and turkeys and just all kinds of wildlife. And then just the nature. I discovered a tree this morning that I hadn't noticed before. It was a little bush. It was called a bladder tree or something that had these neat little flower things on it. And so, yeah, so fortunately I had my, as I like to call it, my app machine, my phone with me, and I Googled it and found out what it was. But
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
and it's just, I mean, but I think to your point, Heather, is that just those little things could be so transformal forming for people, I think, and being able to just have a new perspective on the world, which also changes our perspective on ourselves.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And then interestingly, so many things that we have already known in an embodied way are beginning to be researched. For example, the idea that if we tune into bird song, it's really supportive to our nervous system, really supportive to the vagal nerve,
Mm-hmm.
and can help remind us if the birds are singing that we are potentially safe, that there likely isn't an overhead threat. For example, if you've ever been out
Mm-hmm.
walking and listened to the birds singing and it suddenly gets silent, that's often a really good cue to look up and notice there's a hawk or an eagle or a predator in the air above. And
Mm-hmm.
just in terms of what you were saying about walking with your clients, most of my sessions end up being walk and talk nature-based sessions with movement
Mm-hmm.
incorporated. It also supports that bilateral stimulation of the brain. So there's
Yes.
more and more emerging research that qualifies and quantifies a lot of these things we've already known a long time. There's an organization in Canada, I don't know if you've got similar at the moment in the US, called Parks RX. So it's
Mm-hmm.
PARX, and it's
Mm-hmm.
about it supports various medical practitioners in providing prescription nature, which is so funny. That brings up a whole other conversation about
Mm-hmm.
commodification of the commons, which is
Mm-hmm.
we could go way off on that, but that idea that there's an idea to support nature as a really valid healing modality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's one of the things that when I particularly if I get clients that are really struggling with depression, I really encourage them. I said, I want you to get as much daylight as you can. I mean,
Yeah.
just get out in the sun, get out in the daylight. And, well, I'm sure for particularly there where you're located in Canada, much farther north, in the winter months, the seasonal affective stuff is a real thing. I
Hmm.
mean, it's
Hmm.
just, and so, and being in nature, and I think being in as much daylight as possible is a huge has a huge healing property to it, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And something I should speak to also is that for me as a therapist, as a clinician, it's incredibly supportive to work in these areas. When I'm doing nature-based work, I like to say I'm not necessarily the therapist. I'm simply there as a facilitator, supporting the therapeutic work being done by the trees and the birds and the other beings who are out there along with us. And there might be occasionally very helpful. Yeah, I'm not alone working out there, if that makes sense. It's
Hmm.
feels like you're very much part of a team.
Yes, yes, and I like that the way you frame that as far as interrupting thought patterns,
Hmm.
and I think that's. I was listening to a podcast this morning. It was on one on attachments and relationships, and one of the things that they brought out is the ability to interrupt the kind of obsessive thoughts you might have,
Hmm.
particularly for someone that might have an anxious attachment style of being able to focus on other things rather than that particular person. And it's just again, it's just kind of a validating thing to say, okay, what we're telling people and what we're doing is sound. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you want to say a little more, Heather, about how you've grown your practice and a little more about what your practice looks like now and where it came from?
Of course. I think I should preface this by saying I'm the accidental entrepreneur. So much of I had dreamed for years of just walking with people in the woods, but so much of what has happened has just been around following the ball of what comes next. So after my counseling internship, interestingly, so I did my degree in wilderness therapy at Naropa University. I knew this has always been an area of interest to me, but I was doing my counseling internship at a place that didn't have enough office space for me. So I got permission from them to do my original internship sessions outdoors and on trail, which was great to work with a supervisor who was open to that. And then when I was graduating, I wanted to work with somebody who was doing nature-based work, and I couldn't find anybody in my area.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward, I launched my private practice doing nature-based walk and talk work in this area. We call it the Sea to Sky corridor that links Vancouver up to Pemberton along the west coast of British
Mm-hmm.
Columbia. And I've been doing this work. It's been really exciting. And then we told that story of the date and then the book series that came from that.
Mm-hmm.
Since the launch of this book, and I must tell any listeners out there who are writing curious and aspiring to writing a book, do it. It's amazing. This first one became a bestseller overnight. We launched it on Valentine's, Galentine's, Palentine's Day, whatever we want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of years ago, it became a bestseller and sold a number of copies. But I want to tell you, it did not make much money. It still hasn't made back what we've invested into the design of it. And yet, an interesting thing that seems to have happened is that my practice has been full since then. In fact, so much so that I haven't been able to keep up. So bringing in an associate to be doing nature-based walk and talk work alongside me. But
Mm-hmm.
what's really interesting, I think what may have happened accidentally is that these books tell a little bit more about me and our work and start to create that rapport and connection, perhaps before you have ever even met somebody. And the other thing is, whether I ever see somebody as a client or not, my real hope, particularly with this second book, our audacious goal is to get it into the hands of all people with periods and all people who love them, which
Mm-hmm.
of course will encompass all of us, because without periods, there is no human life on earth.
Mm-hmm.
And the real reason for that is that because this has been one of the most stigmatized, shamed things, at least in North American society. This is not true across all cultures, but certainly in our dominant culture today. And the hope is that if we're able to talk more freely about things we haven't historically spoken about, we can find a lot more support for one another. And
Right.
yeah, this is one that what's really interesting. There's a wave right now happening where more and more people are talking about menstruation, menopause, perimenopause, but stigmatized subjects in general. And I'm delighted
Yeah.
to do that. I mean, it's possible that we therapists might hopefully one day work ourselves out of a job.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's hopefully we will. But it's yeah, and I think it's just giving people permission to talk about their as I like to refer to it, their internal world, and then
Hmm.
to be able to hear from others, oh, they're experiencing much the same thing that I am, and I think that's the power of what you're doing is that it gives people permission to express all those things.
Of course, and that's just the hope, right? Is that we not feel alone out there with
Right.
whatever it is we're carrying, and we as therapists can support as many people as we can, and there's a limit to that. So that really excited me that these anthologies have accidentally turned. I mean, there was a lot of intent there. Every writer was hoping that this would land on somebody's bedside table and help them feel less alone.
Right, right. Well, it's yeah, you're an inspiration to me, Heather, and that I've been encouraged by a lot of people to do not necessarily an anthology, but a memoir, just of all that I've gone through in my life. And
Oh,
so
please do.
so it's encouraging to know that it can make a huge difference in people's lives. So
Oh,
yeah.
Gordon, I can't wait to read it. And one thing I'll say also is that all of the writers have said that despite this being very hard, doing it in community, working with other writers,
Mm-hmm.
and then knowing it was going to hopefully support somebody has been a
Mm-hmm.
really, really helpful, transformative process for them. So
Right.
that's my hope for you also. And I can't wait to get a copy of your book. That's for sure.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
here to help.
I've said it too many times out loud, so I've got to do it now. So, well, Heather, I've got to be respectful of your time, and this has just been a delight to talk to you. Tell folks how they can reach you and where they can find the book and that sort of thing.
I'm at heatherhendrie.com, awfullyhilarious.com, and truenaturewilderness.therapy.com. And we have accounts under all those same names on Instagram. And of course, the books, I'd recommend requesting it in your public library so that everyone can access it. And failing that, it's in the US, it's on bookshop.org. And I'm saying this for all aspiring writers out there and bookstore owners, because bookshop.org donates to local bookstores and also supports independent writers. And failing that, if you're in parts of the world where you can't access that, they're on Amazon.
Well, Heather, I hope I can get you back again on the podcast. This has been a lot of fun and great to chat with you. Well, Again, a big thanks to Heather for joining me on the podcast. And be sure and check out her book, Awfully Hilarious, and you'll find links here in the show notes and the show summary for that. I think it's going to be a good read. I'm looking forward to delving into that, even though I'm not, as she put it, a person that menstruates, at least not so far at this point in my life. But anyway, not to go too far down a rabbit trail with that. But anyway, be sure and check it out. And again, big thanks to Heather for being on the podcast. Also, be sure and check out Gusto. You can go to practiceoftherapy.com/Gusto. And I will say that that is an affiliate link. So if you decide to sign up with Gusto, I do get a small commission for you doing that. And also be sure and check out our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes. They are the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers. They're who I use in my practice, and I'm always impressed with how they continue to improve the platform and the different things that it enables us to do within our practice. So be sure and check it out, practiceoftherapy.com/TherapyNotes, and you can try them out for 2 months for free just by using the promo code Gordon, Gordon. So that wraps this episode up, folks, and hope you'll have a good rest of your week. And be sure to check out my friend Ashley's store, mentalhealthwaretn.com, and take advantage of that back to school sale she's got going on right now. And you can use the promo code just BACKTS24 and get 25% off your first order by using that at checkout. So be sure and check that out. So we'll be back with you next week, and looking forward to you hearing from another great guest on the Practice of Therapy podcast. You've been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the PsychCraft network of podcasts. You can find out more about the other great podcasts in the network by visiting psychcraftnetwork.com. And if you haven't done so already, please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com and get your free private practice startup guide, along with a lot of other great resources and webinars and free things just by visiting. Also, be sure to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. This podcast is intended to be educational in purpose and is not intended to give legal, accounting, or counseling advice. If you need a professional, find the right person for that.